The National Student Financial Aid Scheme CEO Andile Nongogo has been fired. This follows a special investigating unit's finding into allegations that he irregularly authorized the awarding of 47 billion rand worth of contracts to direct payment service providers. We are now joined by the spokesperson for the South African Union of Students, Asive Dlanjwa, who is joining us via Teams. Good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. So the decision that has been taken by the NSFAS board on Monday communicated to Scopa yesterday that they have decided to fire the CEO. What's your response to that?
Good morning, Aldrin, to you, your viewers and your listeners, and thank you for having us. We welcome all efforts that have been taken to try and, root out corruption at the scheme, but also to stabilize the scheme. Obviously, we note that the axing of the CEO emanates from the report which we had acknowledged and welcomed as a union as to the allegations that were in fact to try and prove, or rather determine the veracity of the allegations that had been made as it pertains to the appointment of those service providers. So we welcome as all efforts to try and stabilize and deal with corruption. But however, we are saying we do not believe that he is the only person who is responsible for the state in which the scheme finds itself in. That there are many others within the scheme who are absolutely incompetent and who we believe that they should also be let go if the scheme will be able to improve its fortunes.
Who are those people?
For instance, the IT department, and there was some guy that was leading the IT department, one of the most clueless and generally most incompetent human beings alive. The reason we are sitting today still with appeals that have not been responded to, it is precisely because of that department. It has completely failed. Appeals of students are still not responded to. There is no correspondence between the information that students submit and the records of NSFAS. It is in absolute tatters, that department, and as a result, thousands of students up until today are still, some of them, because of that the incompetence of the staff in that department. We've got students that were funded and would have been defunded, or their statuses would change in a matter of a month. It would change 3-4 times. And as a matter of fact, those students, as we sit now, they're about to start their exams. They do not know what is their status. No one is able to tell them what is happening. And this is not an exception. It's not a few students. It's thousands of students. I can tell you I've interacted at least with 3 just this morning. So there are a lot of people who are incompetent in NSFAS that are costing careers of thousands of students. And we think maybe NSFAS needs to begin to do a skills audit of the entire organization and determine who should be there and who should not be there. But based on our interaction with the scheme and having visited the scheme several times, I can tell you for a fact that there are many incompetent people there who are costing us thousands of careers.
Yeah, well, the board is also saying that all staff members associated with wrongdoing, as mentioned in the report, will go through a disciplinary inquiry. But I want to ask you about this clause and what your understanding of it is. It says that they will advise all 4 of the direct payment service providers that their contracts will be terminated. The board will ensure that this termination does not affect the students negatively. In this regard, the board is mindful of the universities they have made and expectations that they had over the next step will take into account both the law and the implications to the service delivery. What's your understanding of what the board is saying here?
Number one, we agree the service providers must go. And we have been saying this not based on what we believe to have been an illegal contracting of them, but because they had proven to be incompetent and had been failing month after month to pay those allowances to students. So we firstly welcome the axing of those service providers. They were utterly incompetent, number one. Number two, we further agree that in fact, and they have called on the scheme to say that their axing must not impact negatively on the payment of allowances to students, that the scheme with the Department of Higher Education must find an amicable way to be able to ensure that they will still be able to distribute these allowances in the midst of getting rid of these contractors. And so that is where we stand. But more than the allowances, which we're also concerned, we're also concerned generally about the opening of applications for the next academic year. And we are hoping that this, in fact, and calling on the department and the leadership of the scheme, that this instability that we are seeing, we are hoping that it is not going to cost us the administrative period of ensuring that all, because by the way, by now, applications should have already been opened for students to begin to apply. It's not yet open. So we are really concerned about that, Aldrin, to be honest with you, because that can only mean that whatever is not done now will only create a backlog and ensure that we have a crisis when the academic year in 2024 begins. So this is something else that we are actually quite concerned about with all of this instability that is seemingly transpiring at the scheme.
Yeah, well, the board still says that notwithstanding the current challenges, the board reaffirms its commitment to implement the direct payment solution. And as you've said, that if you end the contract with these 4 fintech companies, considering also how long it took actually to get to a point where they are appointed, and also the implementation of the service and the disruption that it caused in the lives of the beneficiaries of NSFAS, how would this be possible to have a direct payment solution where there is no tender that has been opened currently, and in the next 2-3 months we have the 2025, or rather 2024 academic year that will start?
A direct payment system probably also should, stress. A direct payment system will prove to be one of the most efficient ways to be able to pay students, because it will assure us that we can pay students directly and ensure that it will root out all the many middlemen so that we are able to minimize corruption. However, in fact, how we had envisioned it as a union initially when we agreed to the direct payment system, we had hoped that NSFAS would bulk up its own capacity and reinforce its own capacity to be able to carry out that mandate without necessarily contracting service providers. 1. 2, we had hoped that because this is a state institution, it could work with other state institutions, including the likes of your post banks, etc., to improve state capacity and be able to pay these allowances.
Well, is that the same post bank that is struggling to pay people their SASA grants on time? Do you really want the post bank to be taking over that service?
We assume that it was maybe based on the inefficiencies that you are referring to, that the scheme would have not taken that route. But it does not excuse the fact that we have to build state capacity. You see, the argument that Post Bank is failing and therefore we should not use state institution is the same argument that someone would say, no, let us collapse ESCOM and use private people to produce for us to have energy. And we don't agree with that. It must be fixed. We're not going to discard and cast out state institutions that are meant to benefit the poor and the working class because they have been run by people who are incompetent and end up in a privatized state. Well, we can't allow that. And so we're still saying that the capacity of the state must be increased, must be strengthened. Ideally, all those allowances should be paid by Post Bank or any state institution. We are not going to fall to the trap of saying, let us collapse state institutions because seemingly they are run by people who are incompetent. I agree with you. It has been failing, but we are not going to throw the baby with the water. We must commit to improving, strengthening state institutions to service the poor and the working class, because they will not be able to afford and live under a privatized a country where everything is privatized and commercialized for that matter.